My daughter-in-law introduced me as just the maid, so I handed her the house keys and said, "Hope you're good with bills. If you've ever been made to feel worthless by those you love most, this story is for you." Subscribe now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The taste of betrayal begins with apple pie. I spent that morning peeling Granny Smith's, my arthritic fingers working the knife with practiced precision. Michael always loved my pie. Perhaps that's why I made it that Sunday. Some primal maternal instinct sensing my son needed comforting before I even knew why. When the doorbell rang, I straightened my cardigan and patted my silver hair. 5 years a widow, and still Richard's voice in my head. "Shoulders back, Eleanor. You taught generations of students. Never let them see you slouch." Michael's smile seemed stretched too thin across his face. Vanessa stood beside him, her designer purse clutched like a shield. Even before they spoke, I knew. Parents develop a sixth sense for trouble. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, not meeting my eyes. My living room had always been my sanctuary. Antique side tables that Richard and I had found during our travels, family photos arranged meticulously on bookshelves, the faint scent of lavender from sachets I tucked between cushions. Now it felt like a witness stand as they explained their temporary financial restructuring. "The startup is going through some changes," Michael explained, his hands fidgeting. "We can't afford our place in Cambridge anymore." Vanessa's eyes scanned my shelves, lingering on the small silver box my grandmother had brought from Ireland. I caught her calculating gaze as it swept across the room, mentally rearranging my furniture, erasing me from the space. "We were hoping we could stay here," Michael continued, "just until things stabilize." I should have seen the warning signs. The way Vanessa discreetly took photos of my things while Michael distracted me with talk of their business troubles. The practiced nature of their story. But when your child asks for help, maternal instinct overrides suspicion. "Family is family," I said, the words automatic after 72 years of putting others first. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're a lifesaver, Eleanor." That night, after they'd gone upstairs with their overnight bags, the first wave of an invasion, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The remnants of apple pie between us had been the last normal moment. Tomorrow they would arrive with suitcases and boxes. Tomorrow my routine of decades would begin to fracture. I ran my fingers over the aged wood of my kitchen table, the same one where I'd graded papers for 35 years, where Richard and I had planned our dream trip to Europe, the trip I'd been saving for since his death. My phone lit up with a text from Michael. "Thanks again, Mom. This means everything to us." I replied with a heart emoji, simple and clean. No indication of the unease settling into my bones like the first whisper of winter. No hint that I'd caught Vanessa photographing the drawer where I kept my financial documents. Outside my window, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across my garden. Something else flickered too, a small warning light in the corner of my mind that I chose to ignore. Family is family, after all. But families can devour you from the inside out. "Eleanor, don't you think these photos are a bit dated?" 3 weeks into their stay, and Vanessa was already redecorating. My wedding photo disappeared from the mantel, replaced by her abstract print of geometric shapes that meant nothing to me. Michael was perpetually in meetings, a ghost in my home who appeared only to grab coffee or make excuses for his wife. "Those photos have been there for 20 years, I replied, watching her manicured fingers dismiss my memories. "Exactly. Time for fresh energy." She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "This is why Michael and I never visit. This place feels like a museum." I swallowed the retort rising in my throat. The museum comment stung. This wasn't just decor. It was evidence I had lived, loved, mattered. But I retreated to the kitchen instead of arguing. Another small surrender in an increasingly one-sided war. Later, searching for my grandmother's silver brooch to wear to lunch with Judith, I found the jewelry box emptier than I remembered. When I mentioned this to Michael, he frowned. "Mom, are you sure you didn't misplace it? You've been a bit forgetful lately." "I'm 72, not senile," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone when I saw him flinch. "I'll ask Vanessa," he promised, but never did. That night, I overheard them through the thin wall between our bedrooms. "Your mother's sitting on a gold mine here," Vanessa whispered. "That retirement fund, this house, why is she hoarding it all for some stupid vacation? She worked her whole life. Van, she deserves, what about what we deserve? This temporary situation could be permanent if we play it right. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the vibration of their voices plotting against me. Somehow, I'd become a resource rather than a person, a means to their end. The next morning, I started keeping a journal, documenting each small theft, each boundary crossed. I moved my passport and most important documents to a lockbox at the bank. Not paranoia if they're really after you, Richard would have said. Small bills began disappearing from my purse. The groceries I bought vanished overnight, replaced by expensive organic brands I couldn't afford, yet somehow I was still expected to cook for 3. "We're contributing," Michael insisted when I finally broached the subject of expenses. He slid $200 across the table, less than a quarter of that month's utilities and food costs. "The startup's almost turning the corner," he added, the same promise he'd made 3 weeks ago. I nodded, accepting the insufficient offering while mentally calculating how much longer my savings would last at this rate. The European trip fund was dwindling, each withdrawal a small death of the future Richard and I had planned. That evening, I found Vanessa wearing my reading glasses while scrolling through her phone. "Sorry, forgot mine upstairs," she said without looking up. "By the way, we're having some investors over for dinner next week. You'll help, right? Your cooking is so homey." The way she said homey, like it was one step above primitive. In my own home, I'd become invisible except when useful. A cook, a maid, a bank account, everything but the person I'd spent 72 years becoming. I agreed to cook for her investors, hating myself a little for the automatic compliance, for the lifetime habit of accommodating others until there was nothing left of myself to give. That night, I dreamt of empty rooms where my possessions once stood, and of locked doors I no longer had keys to open. "Eleanor, would you mind handling the laundry today? My silks need special care." Vanessa's request, command really, came as I was balancing checkbooks at the kitchen table. 4 months into their stay, and the temporary arrangement had calcified into permanent expectation. I looked up from my dwindling account balance. "I have plans with Judith this afternoon." Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "Oh? Well, I suppose Michael's blue shirt can wait until tomorrow's meeting. It's only the potential Series A investors. After all, the manipulation was so transparent it was almost artistic." I closed my checkbook and stood. "Leave the basket by the washing machine," I said, hating the defeat in my voice. This was the new rhythm of my days. Cooking meals I couldn't afford, cleaning spaces that were no longer mine, watching my retirement account shrink like ice in summer heat. Meanwhile, packages arrived daily for Vanessa. Designer clothes with tags I recognized from luxury department stores. That evening, preparing dinner, I overheard them in Richard's old study, which had become Michael's home office. "We need to extend our stay at least another 6 months, Vanessa was saying. "The investors want to see stability before they commit." "Mom's been asking when we're moving out," Michael replied, his voice hesitant. "She mentioned her Europe trip again yesterday." Vanessa's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Europe? At her age? That money would be better invested in our future. Our family's future." It was her dream with Dad. Dreams change. Reality doesn't. We need capital for expansion, and she's sitting on it while living in the past. I set down the knife I'd been chopping vegetables with, my hand trembling. In their eyes, I wasn't even a person anymore, just an obstacle to their ambitions, an ATM with inconvenient opinions. That night, I removed the small lockbox from beneath my sweaters and counted my emergency cash. Not enough to live on, but perhaps enough to escape if necessary. I added my passport and the deed to the house, which thankfully remained solely in my name. The next morning, checking my bank statement online, I noticed unfamiliar charges, streaming services I never used, food delivery apps, online shopping. The joint account I'd opened with Michael for household expenses had been drained to near zero. When confronted, Michael looked genuinely surprised. "Must be a mistake." "Mom, I'll talk to Vanessa." His promise evaporated like morning dew. No explanations, no reimbursements, just more vague assurances about the startup's imminent success. That afternoon, I called my landlord, Mr. Peterson, ostensibly to report a leaky faucet. Really, I needed to confirm my suspicion. "Yes, Mrs. Simmons. I received the inquiry about transferring the lease," he said. "I told them I'd need your written authorization, not just verbal consent." My blood ran cold. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I've authorized no such change." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, the home I'd lived in for decades suddenly feeling like quicksand beneath my feet. They weren't just taking my possessions, they were trying to take my home itself. That night, I began quietly packing a small suitcase, hiding it in the back of my closet. Not running away, I told myself. Strategic retreat. Richard would have understood the difference. The day of Vanessa's investor dinner arrived with military precision. I'd spent my own money on roast beef, fresh vegetables, and a bottle of wine I couldn't afford. An investment in my freedom, I reasoned. Impress these people, secure their funding, watch Michael and Vanessa finally leave. My kitchen transformed into a war room as I peeled, chopped, and seasoned. Battle stations disguised as cooking preparations. Vanessa breezed in occasionally, rearranging my careful work while offering unwanted advice. The table setting looks a bit quaint, Eleanor. Let me fix it. She replaced my wedding china with her own minimalist plates. Another piece of me, erased. My phone buzzed, Judith checking in. I'd been sharing bits of my situation with her, never the full truth. Too ashamed, perhaps, to admit how completely I'd lost control of my life. Everything okay? Her text read. Fine, I replied. The universal lie of women who've been silenced. The doorbell rang at precisely 7. 2 couples entered my home, all sharp edges and expensive watches. I recognized their type immediately. Wealth that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that simply assumed its own importance. Welcome, I said, extending my hand to the first man. Richardson, I think his name was. Vanessa smoothly intercepted, guiding them toward the living room. Let me introduce you to our home. Eleanor, could you check on the appetizers? Our home. The casual theft of words matched the theft of my space, my money, my dignity. I retreated to the kitchen, adjusting my favorite apron, the one Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary, embroidered with sprigs of lavender. When I emerged with a tray of canapes, Vanessa was mid-story, completely renovated since we moved in. The previous aesthetic was rather dated. The male investors nodded appreciatively, while their wives scanned the room with the same calculating gaze Vanessa had perfected. Ellie, there you are, Vanessa called, using the nickname I'd always hated. Let me introduce well, she's practically our housekeeper at this point. The room tilted slightly. I steadied the tray, feeling heat rise to my face. Eleanor is my mother, Michael interjected quickly, but his eyes remained fixed on his shoes. Practically family, Vanessa added with a tight smile. Don't know what we'd do without her keeping everything running smoothly. The Richardson woman nodded politely in my direction. It's so lovely you have help. Good household staff is so hard to find these days. Staff. I was staff now, in my own home. Paying the majority of expenses, cooking their meals, washing their clothes. I served dinner mechanically, the conversation flowing around me as if I were invisible. When I attempted to join in, mentioning my years teaching economics, my small but carefully managed investment portfolio, Vanessa smoothly redirected. Eleanor has the cutest stories, but speaking of market projections, after dessert, Richardson raised his glass. Compliments to your cook, Michael. This meal was exceptional. Oh, Ellie loves being useful, Vanessa answered before Michael could speak. Don't you, Ellie? Something shifted inside me then, tectonic plates of suppressed dignity finally colliding. Decades of being the peacemaker, the supporter, the invisible foundation upon which others built their lives, all of it trembled, then cracked. I removed my apron slowly, folded it with deliberate care, and placed it on the table. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, this is my house. I pay the rent. These are my dishes. And until recently, this was my life. The silence that followed was absolute. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me across my dining room table. The investors' expressions cycled rapidly from confusion to embarrassment. Michael's face drained of color. Only Vanessa maintained her composure, her smile freezing in place like setting concrete. Eleanor has such a wonderful sense of humor, she laughed, the sound brittle as thin ice. Mom, why don't you bring out that lovely apple tart while I tell everyone about our second quarter projections? Mom, the first time she'd called me that in months. Amazing how fast family ties reassert themselves in crisis. I'm not joking, I continued, my voice low but firm. And I'm not your maid. I've been subsidizing your lifestyle while you drain my accounts and sell my possessions. Richardson glanced at his wife, clearly sensing he'd stepped into a domestic minefield. Perhaps we should reschedule? No need, I said, reaching into my cardigan pocket. I placed my house keys on the table in front of Vanessa with a small, definitive click. Since I'm just the help, I'll be leaving. Hope you're good with bills, Vanessa. The rent's due next week. The stunned silence propelled me upstairs to my bedroom where my packed suitcase waited. I added my journal, a photo of Richard, and the small box of jewelry Vanessa hadn't yet discovered. My hands should have been shaking, but they moved with calm precision, as if they belonged to someone else, someone stronger than I'd been just minutes before. Michael appeared in the doorway, panic etched across features, so like his father's. "Mom, please. She didn't mean it like that. You know how Vanessa gets around important people." I zipped the suitcase closed. "Do I? Because it seems I don't know either of you anymore. Where will you go? This is ridiculous. It's almost midnight." "I've booked a hotel," I lied, having made no such arrangements. "I'll contact you when I'm settled." Downstairs, the investors were making hasty goodbyes. Vanessa's voice carried up the stairs, damage control in full swing. "Family dynamics. You know how it is. Eleanor's been struggling with memory issues lately. We moved in to care for her, actually." Another lie to add to the collection. I shouldered past Michael and descended the stairs with my suitcase. Vanessa's eyes widened when she saw me, a flash of genuine panic crossing her perfect features. "Eleanor, don't be dramatic," she hissed, grabbing my arm as I reached for the door. "Think about what you're doing." I looked directly into her eyes, something I realized I'd stopped doing months ago. When had I begun avoiding her gaze? When had I started making myself smaller? "I have thought about it," I replied. "For the first time in months, I'm thinking very clearly." As I stepped outside, the night air hit my face like a baptism. Behind me, I heard Michael call my name, his voice cracking like it had when he was a child waking from nightmares. For a moment, maternal instinct nearly pulled me back. But sometimes love means walking away. I didn't look back as I wheeled my suitcase down the driveway. Inside my pocket, my phone began vibrating with Michael's calls. I silenced it and kept walking. Freedom tastes like fear at first, metallic and sharp on the tongue. But with each step away from that house, I felt something unfurling in my chest, the first tender shoots of dignity taking root again. The hotel clerk's expression shifted from boredom to concern when my credit card was declined. I tried another, then a third. All rejected. The realization washed over me in a cold wave. They'd emptied my accounts. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" he asked, eyeing my suitcase. I opened my wallet with trembling fingers and counted the emergency cash I'd hidden from Vanessa's systematic pillaging. Enough for 2 nights at best. "No problem," I replied, sliding several bills across the counter. "I prefer to pay cash." The room was basic but clean. Nothing like my home with its carefully curated memories, but blessedly free of Vanessa's critical gaze and Michael's disappointed sighs. I sat on the edge of the bed, the magnitude of my situation finally hitting me. I was 72 years old with no home, limited funds, and a family that had betrayed me. The weight of it pressed against my chest until tears came. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that bent me double. When the storm passed, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed simultaneously stranger and more familiar than the person I'd been for months. Eyes red-rimmed but clear. Posture straight, despite everything. What would Richard do? I whispered to the mirror. Richard would have a plan. Richard would take action. First, I called the bank's 24-hour line, reporting possible fraud and freezing all remaining accounts. Next, I texted Judith, the only person I trusted completely. "Need help? Can I call you?" Her response was immediate. Always. When I explained what had happened, the gradual takeover of my home, the financial manipulation, tonight's final humiliation, Judith's usual gentle tone hardened. "Those entitled little parasites," she said. "You're coming to stay with me, Eleanor." No arguments. "I can't impose." "Impose? After 40 years of friendship? After you let me cry on your shoulder through my divorce? After you tutored my son for free when he was failing algebra? I'm sending a car for you tomorrow morning." The fierce loyalty in her voice broke through my shame. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I felt. The next day, arriving at Judith's cozy Salem home, I felt a surge of vertigo, displacement mixed with relief. Her guest room was small but bright, windows overlooking a garden just coming into spring bloom. "It's not much," Judith apologized, setting my suitcase beside the bed. It's perfect, I replied, meaning it. Over tea we formulated a strategy. Judith's practical approach was exactly what I needed. No pity, just solutions. First step, contact my landlord to prevent any attempted lease transfer. Second, document everything for potential legal action. And you need to talk to Martha Goldstein, Judith insisted. Best elder law attorney in Massachusetts, handled my mother's estate brilliantly. I'm not sure I can afford. Use that Europe fund, she interrupted. Richard would want you to fight. She was right. The vacation fund had been our dream, but Richard would consider this an investment in my dignity, something far more valuable than seeing the Sistine Chapel. That afternoon, I received a text from Michael. Mom, please come home. We can explain everything. Home, as if I still had one. I showed Judith, who snorted in disgust. Block him, at least for now. As I moved to do so, another text appeared. The investors pulled out after your scene. Thanks a lot. The guilt reflex was immediate. My son was hurting, and it was my fault. Then Judith gently took the phone, reading the message aloud. Your son and his wife steal from you, humiliate you publicly, try to take your home, and he has the audacity to blame you when consequences arrive? Eleanor, this isn't your fault. In her clear eyes, I saw myself reflected not as the villain of Michael's story, but as someone worthy of defense. The realization straightened my spine and squared my shoulders. You're right, I said, taking back the phone and blocking Michael's number with a decisive tap. I think I'm ready to call that lawyer now. Judith squeezed my hand. That's my girl. For the first time since Richard died, someone was fighting for me. Even better, it was me. Mrs. Simmons, based on what you've told me, we have grounds for both civil action and potentially criminal charges. Martha Goldstein's office exuded competence. Gleaming wood, organized files, and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to winning. 3 days after leaving my home, I sat across from her, my journal open on her desk, along with bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals and credit card charges I never made. I don't want to send my son to jail, I said, the words catching in my throat. Martha nodded, her eyes kind behind sharp-framed glasses. Most parents don't, but we need to protect you and recover what's yours. First step is securing your property and finances. We spent the next hour creating a detailed timeline of events. With each incident I recounted, the disappearing jewelry, the manipulation, the humiliation at dinner. Martha's expression grew more determined. They're counting on your silence, she said finally. People who exploit the elderly. I'm not elderly, I interrupted. I'm 72 and perfectly competent. A smile flickered across her face. Precisely my point, Mrs. Simmons. You're not a vulnerable target. You're a formidable opponent they underestimated. Something about her framing shifted my perspective. Not a victim seeking help, but a woman reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The next morning, accompanied by Martha and Mr. Peterson, I returned to my house. Michael's car was gone, but lights were on inside. I used my spare key, the one they didn't know about, hidden at Judith's years ago. The sight that greeted us confirmed my worst fears. The living room was half emptied, packing boxes stacked by the door. My antique secretary desk, Richard's wedding gift to me, was missing, along with most of my silver and several paintings. Document everything, Martha instructed, already taking photos. Mr. Peterson, I'd appreciate you noting any damage to the property. We moved through rooms like archaeologists cataloging a ransacked tomb. In my bedroom, dresser drawers hung open, my remaining jewelry gone. Richard's leather-bound journals, his unfinished novel, had vanished from the bookshelf where they'd been kept since his death. My throat tightened. The journals. They took his journals. Those irreplaceable pages contained pieces of Richard's soul. Selling my jewelry was cruel. Stealing his words was unforgivable. In the office, a forgotten folder revealed the truth. Bank statements showing substantial deposits to Michael and Vanessa's account 3 months before they claimed financial distress. Another document outlined plans to use family property as collateral for a business loan. They were never in trouble, I whispered, the papers trembling in my hand. They lied about everything. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. Mrs. Simmons, Eleanor, this is fraud, plain and simple. Mr. Peterson appeared in the doorway, his usual cheerful expression grim. There's damage to the bathroom plumbing and a window in the guest room. Also, this month's rent hasn't been paid. I sank into Richard's old office chair, overwhelmed. Then my eyes caught something on the desk, a receipt from an antique dealer in Boston. Listed items included vintage journals and several pieces of jewelry whose descriptions matched my missing heirlooms. Martha looked over my shoulder, then pulled out her phone. "I know this dealer. Let me make a call." While she stepped outside, I ran my fingers over the dusty surface of Richard's desk. Here, he had written love letters to me during our early marriage. Here, he had graded papers alongside me on Sunday afternoons. Here, he had begun the novel he never finished. "They're selling his words," I said to Mr. Peterson, my voice breaking. The kindly landlord awkwardly patted my shoulder. "We'll get them back, Mrs. Simmons." Martha returned, a determined glint in her eye. "The dealer confirms they purchased items from Vanessa 2 days ago. Some have already been sold, but they still have the journals and several jewelry pieces. I've convinced them to hold everything pending legal review." I stood up, sudden clarity washing through me. I want it all back, not just my possessions, my dignity, my life. Martha nodded, something like respect flashing in her eyes. "Then let's go get it." "You're going to do what?" Judith nearly dropped her teacup when I explained my plan. 2 weeks after discovering the extent of Michael and Vanessa's deception, I sat in Judith's sunroom. Martha's legal strategy spread before us. What had begun as simple recovery had evolved into something more. "I'm going to attend their company launch," I repeated. Martha's arranged everything. The invitation had arrived yesterday, a peace offering from Michael, who'd finally tracked me down through mutual acquaintances. His voicemail was practiced contrition. "Mom, please come. We can explain everything. We miss you." What Michael didn't know was that Martha had already begun legal proceedings. The antique dealer, fearing accessory charges, had returned Richard's journals and provided detailed records of all transactions with Vanessa. My bank had reversed most of the fraudulent charges, and most importantly, Martha had secured a court order preventing any attempt to use my property as loan collateral. "Isn't confronting them risky?" Judith asked. "They've already shown how manipulative they can be." I sipped my tea, noting how my hand no longer trembled. "That's why we're not confronting them, yet. We're gathering evidence. The launch event would be filled with investors and business journalists, the perfect audience for the truth to emerge organically. Not as a scandal, but as a consequence of choices Michael and Vanessa had made. Besides," I added, "I've been invisible for too long. It's time they saw me." The day before the event, I visited a salon for the first time in years. The stylist's eyes lit up when I explained what I wanted. "Not a dramatic change," I clarified. "Just an update. Something that reflects who I am now." 2 hours later, I hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. My silver hair, usually pulled back in a simple bun, now fell in a sleek bob that framed my face. The cut emphasized cheekbones I'd forgotten I had, and brightened eyes dulled by months of suppressed anger. "Perfect," I whispered, meeting my own gaze without flinching. Next stop was a boutique Judith had recommended. The saleswoman, instead of dismissing me as too old for her stylish wares, guided me toward outfits that balanced elegance with authority. "You carry yourself like someone with presence," she observed, helping me into a deep blue dress with clean lines and subtle detailing. "You should wear clothes that honor that." I emerged with the blue dress and a tailored pantsuit in soft gray, colors that felt like me, but a stronger version than I'd allowed myself to be recently. That evening, Martha called with final arrangements. "We'll arrive separately. Our court official will wait for my signal. The journalist will approach only after I've made initial contact. And Michael, Vanessa, they'll have the opportunity to explain themselves. How they respond determines what happens next." After we hung up, I stood at Judith's guest room window, watching twilight settle over her garden. Something Richard once said floated back to me. "Courage isn't being unafraid, Ellie. It's being afraid and doing what's right anyway." Tomorrow I would face my son and the woman who had systematically dismantled my life. I was terrified of confrontation, of public exposure, of seeing the final dissolution of what our family had been. But for the first time in years, fear wasn't making my decisions. I was. The hotel ballroom glittered with ambition and expensive watches. Standing in the entrance, I adjusted my blue dress and took a steadying breath. Judith squeezed my hand before melting into the background as planned. "Remember," she whispered, "you belong here more than anyone." Across the room, Vanessa held court in a stunning red dress I recognized immediately. I'd seen the charge on my credit card statement. Michael orbited nearby, smiling tensely at potential investors. I moved through the crowd, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter. Several guests glanced at me curiously. I clearly wasn't the typical startup scene demographic, but something in my demeanor prevented questions. Amazing what straight shoulders and direct eye contact could accomplish. Vanessa spotted me first. Her perfect smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself with doubled wattage. "Eleanor," she exclaimed, gliding over with practiced grace. "You came. Michael will be thrilled." Up close, I could see the calculation behind her warm welcome. What story had they prepared? What role was I expected to play tonight? "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, my voice steady. "Family is family." After all, Michael appeared at her side, relief washing over his features. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here. We have so much to explain." "Later," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "The presentation is about to begin. Eleanor, there's a seat saved for you in the back." Of course there was. Out of sight. Contained. Managed. I nodded pleasantly and moved toward the indicated chair, but instead took a position along the wall with clear sightlines to the stage. The lights dimmed, and a slick promotional video began playing. Images of Michael and Vanessa in a sleek office, earnestly discussing their business vision. Vanessa's voiceover provided the narrative. "We started with nothing but an idea and determination. When faced with financial setbacks, we didn't give up. We innovated." The screen showed them working late nights, making sacrifices, a classic startup struggle story, entirely manufactured. I sipped my champagne, waiting. After the video, Vanessa took the stage. She was magnificent, articulate, compelling, the perfect entrepreneurial success story. She spoke of resilience, of reinvention, of leveraging limited resources to achieve unlimited potential. "When we were at our lowest point financially," she said, her voice catching in practiced emotion, "we found strength in scaling back, in simplifying our lives." Translation: in moving into my house and systematically draining my accounts. As she concluded to enthusiastic applause, I felt Martha's presence beside me. "Ready?" she murmured. I nodded, suddenly calm. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. During the networking reception that followed, I circulated slowly through the room. Several of Vanessa's investors from that fateful dinner recognized me, confusion crossing their faces. "Mrs. Ellis, was it?" one asked hesitantly. "Simmons, Eleanor Simmons." I extended my hand. "We met at my house several months ago. I believe Vanessa introduced me as the housekeeper." His discomfort was immediate. I thought that was your home." They implied. "Many things were implied," I replied evenly. "Few were true." Martha appeared with practiced timing, introducing herself as my attorney. Nearby, I noticed the journalist she'd arranged, seemingly engaged in casual conversation, but angled to overhear. "Mrs. Simmons has some interesting insights into the company's origin story," Martha said pleasantly, "particularly regarding their claims of bootstrapping from financial hardship." The investor glanced between us, suddenly wary. "Perhaps we should include Michael and Vanessa in this conversation." "Excellent suggestion," I agreed. As if summoned by the tension in the air, Michael and Vanessa approached, their expressions shifting from confidence to caution when they saw Martha. "Mom, is everything okay?" Michael asked, his eyes darting to Martha's professional attire and notebook. I smiled, feeling strangely peaceful. "Everything is becoming okay, Michael. I thought your investors might appreciate the full story behind your, what did Vanessa call it? Your resilience during financial hardship?" Vanessa's perfect mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, enough for me to see the calculation behind her eyes. "Weighing damage control options. Eleanor has been going through a difficult time," she began, her voice honey-sweet with concern. "We actually moved in with her because we were worried about her memory issues." "My memory is excellent," I interrupted calmly. "I remember exactly when you photographed my financial documents, when you began selling my possessions, when you emptied my accounts." The small circle around us had grown silent. Nearby conversations quieted as attention shifted our way. "Mom, this isn't the place," Michael started, panic rising in his voice. "On the contrary," Martha interjected. "When better to discuss the truth behind a company's founding than at its launch?" She opened her portfolio, removing several documents. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to your investors how a company supposedly struggling financially managed to secure a significant investment round 3 months before you claimed financial hardship to your mother?" The court official I'd noticed earlier moved subtly closer, documents of his own at the ready. I met Michael's eyes directly. You lied to me, took from me, humiliated me, and planned to use my home as collateral without my knowledge. Tonight, you're presenting yourselves as self-made success stories. I gestured around the elegant room. But this isn't success. It's fraud. And it ends tonight. The Boston Globe headline appeared 3 days after the launch event. Tech startup faces allegations of elder exploitation. The article didn't name me directly, but anyone at the event would recognize the situation described. Sitting in Martha's office, I read the piece with mixed emotions. Relief that the truth was emerging. Sadness that it had come to this. And underneath it all, a quiet pride in finally standing up for myself. The investor pullout is already happening, Martha noted, setting a coffee cup before me. 3 have withdrawn funding pending investigation. I set down the newspaper. What happens next? They have 2 choices: fight us in court with evidence stacked against them, or settle. She smiled slightly. Their lawyer called this morning. They want to discuss terms. The settlement negotiations were surprisingly quick. Faced with potential criminal charges and the complete collapse of their business reputation, Michael and Vanessa agreed to return all my possessions, reimburse every unauthorized expense, and pay damages for emotional distress. Most importantly, they signed documents admitting their actions and relinquishing any claim to my property or finances. It's a complete victory, Eleanor, Martha said as I signed the final papers. Yet victory felt hollow. I'd recovered my assets, but lost my son. The antique dealer, eager to avoid legal complications, helped recover most of my sold possessions. Some items had traveled too far to retrieve, but Richard's journals returned to me intact. The moment I held them again, tracing his handwriting with my fingertips, something tight in my chest finally released. Thank you, I whispered to Martha. She squeezed my shoulder. This is just the beginning, Eleanor. Now you get to rebuild. And rebuild I did. With the settlement money, I found a new apartment. Smaller than my old home, but filled with light and possibility. Judith helped me arrange my recovered furniture, creating spaces that honored my past while embracing my future. It looks like you, she declared when we finished. Strong, elegant, no unnecessary frills. I laughed, the sound surprising me with its freedom. Are you calling me frumpy? I'm calling you authentic, she corrected. Something your son and his wife know nothing about. Michael had tried contacting me several times since the settlement. His messages shifted from anger, "You've destroyed everything we worked for," to bargaining, "If you'd just talk to us first," to what sounded like genuine remorse. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know, I'm sorry. I hadn't responded. Not from spite, but because I needed time to find my own voice again before engaging with his. 6 weeks after moving into my new apartment, I received an unexpected message. From Vanessa. I'm filing for divorce. Michael blames me for everything. We've lost the business, the house, everything. I thought you should know your revenge is complete. I showed the message to my therapist, Dr. Chen, during our weekly session. Do you see this as revenge? She asked. I considered the question seriously. No, revenge would have been destroying them because they hurt me. This was about consequences, allowing the truth to create natural outcomes. Dr. Chen nodded. And how do you feel about Michael now? The question hit the tender spot I'd been circling for weeks. I love him. He's my son, but I don't trust him, and I don't know if I ever will again. Trust can sometimes be rebuilt, she observed, but only with consistent actions over time. That evening, I finally responded to Michael's latest message. I'm not ready to talk yet. When I am, it will be about moving forward, not reliving the past. His reply came immediately. I'll wait. For as long as it takes. Looking around my new home, my space, arranged my way, funded by my money, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, peaceful sovereignty over my own life. On my desk sat a travel brochure for Italy, Europe, the dream Richard and I had shared. Beside it lay a new journal where I'd begun planning the trip, now reimagined as a solo adventure. I'm doing it, Richard, I whispered to the empty room that somehow didn't feel empty at all. It just took me a while to find my way. The cafe near Boston Common was my choice, neutral territory for this first meeting. I arrived early, selecting a table with a view of both the entrance and the park beyond. Small decisions that were entirely mine. The daily pleasure of such choices still hadn't faded. 3 months had passed since the settlement. 3 months of rebuilding my life piece by piece. Weekly therapy sessions, coffee with Judith, volunteer work at the library, small steps that formed a path back to myself. Michael entered exactly on time, scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a hesitancy in his movements I'd never seen before. Gone was the confident startup entrepreneur with the perfect life. This was someone humbled, perhaps even broken. "Mom," he said, stopping at my table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Michael." He did, hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. The silence stretched between us. 32 years of love and history, now fractured by betrayal. "I don't know where to start," he finally said. "The beginning might help," I suggested, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded, drawing a deep breath. "Vanessa and I were never in financial trouble. The business was doing well, better than well. We wanted to expand rapidly, and we needed capital. So you decided to take mine." We didn't think of it that way at first. We told ourselves we were just borrowing space, resources. His eyes finally met mine. "But then it became so easy to take more. You never questioned us, never pushed back. Because I trusted you," I said simply. "You were my son." He flinched at the past tense. "Vanessa was persuasive. She kept saying you had more than you needed, that you'd want to help us succeed if you really understood. Did you believe that?" His hands stilled. "I wanted to. It made it easier to justify everything. But deep down, no. I knew we were taking advantage. I just couldn't stop the momentum once it started." I sipped my tea, letting his words settle. Outside, autumn leaves spiraled down from trees lining the common. Nature's lesson in letting go. "The dinner party," I said finally. "When she introduced me as the maid, did you know she would do that?" Pain flashed across his face. "No. I was as shocked as you were, but I didn't defend you. That's on me completely." "Why not?" "Because I was a coward," he answered, no hesitation. "Because standing up to Vanessa meant facing what we were doing to you, and I couldn't bear to see myself that clearly." His honesty surprised me. Perhaps divorce and disgrace had forced a reckoning I couldn't have. "Vanessa's gone back to Chicago," he continued. "The divorce was finalized last month. I'm working at my friend's landscaping company now. Manual labor, minimum wage. It's humbling." I studied my son's face, the features so like Richard's, yet uniquely his own. The boy I'd raised, the man who'd betrayed me. Both realities existed simultaneously. "I don't expect forgiveness," Michael said quietly. "I just wanted you to know I understand what I did. To you. To us. I've lost the right to call myself your son, but I'm trying to become someone worthy of something. Some kind of relationship eventually, if you'll allow it." I thought of Dr. Chen's words about trust requiring consistent actions over time. One conversation couldn't erase months of exploitation, but it could be a beginning. "I'm going to Italy next month," I said. His eyes widened. "Dad's dream trip. Your dream." "Yes, for 3 weeks. Judith was going to join for part of it, but her arthritis is acting up." "I'm glad you're still going," he said. Genuine warmth in his voice. "Dad would be so happy." I placed my hands flat on the table, wedding ring catching the light. "When I return, perhaps we could meet again. Begin the process of whatever comes next." Hope flickered in his eyes. "I'd like that." As we parted outside the cafe, Michael hesitated, clearly wanting to hug me, but respecting the distance I maintained. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me entirely." I studied him in the golden autumn light. My child, yet a stranger I was just beginning to know. "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly, "but I'm willing to watch and wait." Walking away, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't, and might never be completely, but because I had faced the hardest conversation of my life, on my own terms, without diminishing myself to ease another's guilt. That, I realized, was what dignity felt like. Florence in November is magical. Fewer tourists, golden light, and a crispness in the air that makes every ancient stone seem more vivid. Standing on the Ponte Vecchio, I watched the Arno River flow beneath me, centuries of history carried in its current. 2 weeks into my Italian journey, I'd settled into a rhythm of exploration and reflection. Each morning began with espresso at a different cafe, followed by hours wandering museums or narrow streets, journal in hand to capture impressions Richard would have loved. "You should see the light on the Duomo at sunset," I wrote to Judith. It's exactly the color of that ridiculous sweater you made me buy last Christmas. My phone chimed with a notification, an email from Michael. Since our cafe meeting, he'd respected my boundaries, sending only occasional updates about his life rather than pressing for responses. This message was different. Found this while cleaning out my storage unit. Thought you might want it. Attached was a photo of Richard and me on our 20th anniversary, dancing in our backyard. I hadn't seen this particular picture in years, had assumed it lost in the chaos of Vanessa and Michael's occupation. Still have the original, Michael wrote. We'll keep it safe until you're back. I tucked the phone away, unexpectedly moved. A small gesture, yet significant. The first piece of my past he'd returned voluntarily, without legal pressure. That evening, dining alone at a small trattoria, I noticed an elderly Italian couple at the next table. They ate in comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging glances that contained entire conversations. 60 years of marriage, the waiter told me proudly. His grandparents. I smiled, remembering similar silent conversations with Richard. The language of long partnership that Vanessa and Michael had never understood. The value of what they'd tried to take from me wasn't in bank accounts or property, but in the dignity of a life well lived. After dinner, I walked back to my hotel along lamplit streets. Florence felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, unknown territory that somehow welcomed me exactly as I was. In my room, I opened my journal and added to the list I'd been keeping. Things I've discovered traveling alone. 27. I'm braver than I knew. 28. Getting lost sometimes leads to the best discoveries. 29. I don't need to be smaller to make others comfortable. My phone buzzed with a text from Judith. Museum curator called. They want to display Richard's journals in their literary collection next spring. Told them you'd discuss when you return. How's the Italian wine? I laughed, typing back. Magnificent. The journals would make Richard proud. The journals, Richard's unfinished novel that Vanessa had tried to sell, would have a home where others could appreciate them. Another circle, completing itself. On my final morning in Florence, I visited the Uffizi Gallery. Standing before Botticelli's Birth of Venus, I found myself mesmerized not by Venus herself, but by her expression, serene confidence as she emerged fully formed from chaos. Beautiful, isn't it? Asked an American voice beside me. I turned to find an older gentleman with kind eyes and a guidebook. The emergence, I replied. That moment of becoming. He nodded thoughtfully. They say she wasn't born, but rather revealed, already complete. We chatted easily about art and travel, eventually sharing coffee at the gallery cafe. David was a retired professor from Seattle, also traveling alone after losing his wife 2 years earlier. First time I've enjoyed art without Janet's commentary, he admitted, though I still find myself turning to tell her things. I know exactly what you mean, I said. My husband's been gone 5 years, and I still save observations for him. When we parted, David asked if he might email me. Perhaps we could meet again if our travels ever intersected. I surprised myself by agreeing, writing my address in his notebook. Not a romance necessarily, but a connection. A reminder that new beginnings could happen at any age. That evening, my last in Italy, I sat on my hotel balcony, watching sunset paint the city gold. My phone lit up with a message from Michael. Safe travels tomorrow. There's a lot I need to prove to you, but I'm committed to the work. For the first time, I felt ready to respond directly. Thank you for finding that photo. It matters. His reply came quickly. Thank you for not giving up on me entirely. Even when I gave up on you, I gazed out at the ancient city, thinking about resilience. These buildings had survived centuries of war, plague, and flood. They stood not despite their scars, but with them integrated into their very stones. Perhaps people weren't so different. The fractures in my relationship with Michael might never fully heal, but they were now part of our shared history, visible reminders of what had been broken and what might yet be rebuilt with care and time. In 2 days, I would return to my new apartment in Boston, to volunteering at the library, to occasional coffee with Michael, watching for the consistent actions that might eventually rebuild trust, to planning the next adventure, perhaps to Greece in spring. The woman who had handed over her house keys and walked away from humiliation was still here. But she was accompanied now by someone stronger, a woman who had crossed oceans alone, who had faced betrayal without being defined by it, who had discovered that dignity wasn't something others could take unless she surrendered it. My life hadn't turned out as planned. It had turned out as lived, messy, painful, beautiful, and entirely my own. Richard would have understood. And finally, so did I. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.